Hi, welcome to this week's video. This week's video is the second part to our visual literacy unit, and so this week we're going to be going through some stuff about how illustrators and authors use size and shape, how visuals can use space, how they can use light and tone, and how they use color to impact the meaning of the pictures. So we'll start off with size and shape. Now, when you're using size and shape, when we have things like rounded shapes, they can sometimes symbolize the idea of warmth or safety or even some sort of just calmness. Whereas angular shapes, things sometimes like excitement or confusion or even stress, they're not very calming to look at. It does make you feel quite tense. And then we'll talk about size in a second. So if you have a look at shapes, if you look at these shapes here, we've got Mickey Mouse, which is very, very round edges. There's not very many sharp edges or and Spot the Dog or Peppa Pig. If you have a look at these images, they're rounded shapes and they're very calm, almost very childlike as well. The idea of rounded trees and stuff is very immature, very basic, childlike thing, and it does give you that idea of something that's safe and that's child friendly and things like that. So that's what round edges can symbolize. That doesn't mean that all of them do, but ones where the majority of all the edges are round does give you that idea of that safe, calm look. Whereas you have a look at some idea about sharp edges, they can symbolize things like stress and confusion and excitement. If you have a look at some of these Picasso images with their cubism, very much it's like a very stressful image to look at. It's not very easy to look at. And if you have a look at this artwork here, you can clearly see there's lots of angles in it. There's lots of angles in even like the railings here. In the background there's sharp angles here and here, even sharp angles here. Even on the lady's shirt there's angles all over the place. Very, very sharp angles all over the whole page, and it does give you this very uneasy feeling when you're looking at it. It's not a very easy photo to look at, and it does feel like it's quite stressful as well. So like I say, it doesn't mean it's always the case, but that can mean if there's sharp angles, it gives you that idea about that stress or confusion or anger or things like that. Now we'll move on to size. Now size is really important when you're talking about using some sort of visuals, and like I say, this isn't a one rule for all, but if you have a look at there's just two photos here of two different posters of the Hulk. The same movie, two different posters. And how size is used and which one you think is more effective. Now we've got one over here where we do have Hulk in the background and we do have the man in front who is becoming the Hulk. And then we have this idea of this landscape behind that you can look at. And in the middle, in the center there. And they do draw your attention. However, the size isn't that overpowering and you do feel like you could look at other things. Whereas if we have a look at this photo, you do see the same background in here. However, the size is taking up almost 4/5 of the page, and it's mostly all you see. Now, in terms of visuals, I find this one a lot more powerful because the Hulk is supposed to be this huge, big character, and when he only takes up maybe a quarter of the page here, I don't feel that size is really coming through. So the idea of if it's that big in size that you show that through the visuals, this one definitely I think is more effective. And then if you have a look on the other side, which is a movie about ants, which is an animation made in the late 90s, we can see that the ground here is quite low, so most of it is all cloud space. And then we have the ant, which is quite small, which is supposed to be symbolic of how big it is. So we've got the contrast over here. Here we're trying to show how big the Hulk is. Here we're trying to show how small the ant is and how minuscule it is in comparison to the whole rest of the city. So size is really important in terms of what message you want to get across and how you want that image to be perceived. So something you might want to think about when you're illustrating or when you're reading a book or even looking at an artwork. Alright, let's move on. Now we're going to talk about space. Now later on we're going to talk about negative and positive space, which is really important, but just now we're going to have a look at the way that space can shape the meaning of a page. Now, space can indicate isolation or emptiness or even some sort of stress if there is too much space. But if you look at this page, we've got the ocean out here, which is quite calm, and then we have this just small part up here, but most of it's ocean. Now that gives you this idea of isolation, that most of what he's looking at is all space and that there's nothingness. And I know we had to look at that Arrival picture last time where the ship was in the bottom corner and most of it was the ocean. The idea about how big the area actually was and how lonely he did feel. This once again does give you that idea of isolation, things like that. This one's a really nice picture of almost the space between like us and them, or whatever, the physical space, but also like taking sides, that they're all over this side and that he's over this side. And it really does give you this idea of like, this us versus them mentality. And space can also do a thing where it draws your eyes attention to things. And the idea about vectors and the salience, space can also affect that as well. So you can see here, you can choose to look at whichever space you want. You can choose to look at the space made by the wolf here and that. Or if you can't see, there's actually the space is actually the boy's face as well. So whichever space you want to look at, whether it's the negative space in here with the nothingness or the positive space with the fox here, it's up to you which space you look at. But all these, well, this one does give you the idea of that isolation. It can usually, spaces, if you have a lot of negative space, it really is good if you want to get your attention just on this small object, because if you have too much on this page, it will take your mind away from it. Having too much stuff in the page can also affect, which is that busy illustration can also imply chaos and lots of activity and energy. Here we've got lots and lots of things going on in the page, and it does give you the idea of just like it's crazy, it's chaos, there's lots of energy, there's lots going on. So space can have the opposite effect if there's a lot of stuff in the page as well. Okay, let's move on. Now we're going to move on to light and tone. Now light and tone, I put in both together because they're both very similar. But light's really important as well, and tone is also very important. And tone, usually, a dark tone can also imply the idea of, a dark theme or more adult-like. And if you have a look at these pictures here of Batman, now it is quite dark and you can only see the shadow, which is supposed to show how, like, how dark it is and, fighting crime. But the light is also really symbolic. Maybe you could even infer that, the light is coming because he is the light that's going to save everybody. So, like, he's the light of shining, he's what's going to save everybody. So it could be symbolic of that, or it could just be generally they just want to show his shadow and they need a light source to show that shadow. Also over here, once again, it's about what we need. Light and tone are working contrast to each other, light and dark. So how is it going to light up? So we need the light to sort of shine down here, but most of this page is mostly just darkness. This here is one of my favorite images, which is actually hanging up a photo of this in my house, which is a photo by Chris Van Allsburg in a book called Harris Burdick. And you can see really the amazing way that he's used light and tone in this to symbolize, the light's where the action's happening and this lift off, and the tones is dark, scary sort of. It gives you this dark, sort of almost freakish, sort of scary vibe coming from it. And it's a really, really interesting way of using tone. We'll look at a couple more tone in, which is, there's Sean Tan is probably one of the most noted person who uses tone and light. It's really specific light sources that can shine on what's happening in action, and a lot of like cross-hatching and shadow work symbolizes this darker theme as well that we've talked about that comes through, which is also come around here. We can see like really dark areas, which does make you sort of feel a bit scared, like you're going to the unknown or things like that. And this one here, which is really good light source, which is very, very, which we talked about, light traveling in straight lines. A very good idea of, showing the difference between light and dark, and just, it's really just generally showing how, really, tone can be used in all books as well, but darker tones with not much light, just very specific light, it usually symbolizes some sort of, darker theme or more adult, more grown-up audience. Okay, now we move on to color. Now, colors, we have pages that use warm colors, and we have pages that use cool colors, and then we have some pages or some artworks or visuals that use a combination of both. And they can, they don't. And one thing I want you to think about is that just because it says here that hot colors represent excitement or happiness or anger, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's always going to be the case. You can have a hot color that represents a warm color that represents something else, and you have cool colors here that are supposed to represent harmony and peace and sadness. However, that doesn't also necessarily mean they all can do that. It's just an idea of some of the ways that you could use those colors. So, like we talked about before, placement of certain colors near each other can prompt mood. So complementary colors, or territory colors, or something you might want to think about, or something that can cause certain mood changes or moods in there, and also the texture you use as well. So if we have a look here, this gorilla in an Anthony Brown book, there's quite warm colors through here, and that warm color does give you this idea of, like a happiness sort of thing, which if you did have darker colors or some darker tones in this page, the whole meaning of the page could completely change. A scary looking gorilla having sort of a lunch picnic with a girl here could seem quite daunting, but by using warm colors and lighting up the whole room, it has really changed the idea of the meaning of the page. Also the warm colors in the fire page here, give that idea of, there's like a lot going on. It's, angry fire and all that sort of stuff. And another Anthony Brown picture down here, which is also very close to this one up here. Over here, we have a look at how warmer colors here can symbolize the idea of, lighting up a room and making it bright and making it happier. So, just warm colors doesn't always have to be angry or anything like that. It can be just making it nice and, happy, because, there's a light source coming through, which is making everything more colorful. Then we move on to the cooler color. Here, we'll show you two photos. Now, this photo, this image here from a book, cool colors, does give you that symbol of peace and that calmness as well, which is also very similar to down here, this idea of just calm, also a bit of isolation, but it's a very calming effect that these cooler colors are having, which would change if this was a warmer color here. It would change the meaning of the page quite a little bit. Okay, so now for your task for this week. Your task this week is to look at two images, and I want you to talk about the ways that you think the illustrator... This week's task is to look at the ways these two images, which are both set on a pond, I want you to explain how the ways the illustrators convey different meanings through their picture. So here we have a picture of a duck walking near a pond, done by one illustrator, and here we have a picture of some sort of duck character down near a pond as well, and talk about the two different images and which sort of techniques, visual literacy techniques, convey different meanings through these pictures. Okay, that's your task for this week. I hope to see some really interesting comments at the bottom of this video, and make sure you say if it's helpful or not. So anyway, thank you for listening to this. Next week's one's going to be about texture and line and about symbols in work. So thank you. Bye.